Well, thank you everyone for staying through a naturally cooled environment. We're getting cold not through AC, but through the workings of the wind. Philippe, like many of the other speakers, as I mentioned, is invited to contribute to the catalog, and I have commissioned to Philippe a kind of architectural fantasy or a museological framework that could accommodate so many of the works that are on view in Look For Me All Around You, maybe prime among them works such as Aline Bayana's, who is right outside, who pertains to a cosmo-ecological ethics, and all at the same time wondering two things. One, how or is it necessary to uphold this binary between indoor and outdoors? Should we not instead look at this gradation of interiority, as Philippe has eloquently demonstrated? And also, might museological structures be necessary at all for some of these works that exist within environments that need not be bounded? And of course, we know of many historical examples, not to go back all the way to land art, where this is the case. But still, the question of the beholder of all these cultural wonders and all these artistic creation remains. And I find that the Sharjah Biennial and certainly the Sharjah Art Foundation, which is already embedding such ecological principles, is one to uphold in the face of other models that are colonizing the art world, such as the ongoing buildings, actually the accruing of museum buildings in the art world. So this was really a kind of a projective and anticipatory leap into the future that might be, so that the structures within which we live and in which we inhabit can continue to sustain our humanity, as Imani Brown also put. Now, within the next 20 minutes, Diego and I wanted to somehow wrap up the 2-day of this performance program and talk series. We wanted to bring onto the stage Christopher Cozier, who is still with us in the audience. Christopher is one of the artists in Look For Me All Around You. He has he has actually one body of work, which is manifold. 2 elements are on view in Gallery 1. There's a series of drawings with drill bits and anthropomorphized constructions, and a building sandcastle in the desert, open and poetic video, as I like to think about it, that is also indoors in conversation with the drawings. And finally, another extension of the film in one of the outdoor courtyards. So, Christopher, please. And just to announce what will follow, we will finish within about 15 minutes, and I want to invite you to, well, take a break, as some of you are already doing, but also not to miss Kalinaun's piece, Time Travel, which takes place every day, only between 7:20 to 7:40. It's a live stream from Lebanon. It's a diaspora of data, and it is also live in many ways. So this will happen between 7:20 and 7:40. Then we will be able to feed ourselves, feed our bodies again, and we will then move on to the next to last performance in the program. That's Aissa Jackson's Superwoman cover band. It will be in a courtyard just on the other side of the building. And last, at the very end of the day, Tracy Rose in the Sharjah's Ladies Ring, just to announce what is to follow and what you can see in the program.
So, as oh, you want me to switch or? It's okay. Okay, so as Claire has said, this is up to be a way of closing all these reflections that have been unfolding through her program, through her performance program, and through the March meetings that we co-coordinated. And I would like to start with a phrase that I repeat every time that I have an opportunity, that is, if you have privileges, you have the responsibility to question the structures that have granted those to you. And I think the program in general has been continuously proposing to question the same structures that are granted us the privilege to be here in Sharjah, to be reunited, to be encountering discourses, to be reflecting and sharing this week together. And from there, I would like to start the conversation in relation of what follows once the questions are open, what follows once the structures are questioned again, and we're encountering, we have shared this week together, and how this is going to continue beyond the event and the spectacularity of the opening week of the biennial. And that in relation also to the possibilities that the same rhetoric of coloniality, the modern colonial the project that affects the Americas, that affects the south of the world in general, in relation to the art world, as Imani says, beyond the extraction of oil as a natural resource, there is also the option, or also a very common practice in relation to the art world, of the extractivism of ideas, or the epistemological extractivism. So how this encountering can open a conversation about that role also of artists, curators, cultural agents in general, that at the end is a possibility. It's also a cooptation. It's also a possibility of continuing with the same power rhetorics that we have delineated and visibilized. That not because bringing diversity to the wide cube, that wide cube is going to be decolonized. Not because of opening these questions, this is going to be tackled or attended as a community or as a group. So what else follows? And I want to Christopher to give us an insight of his experience, also coming from the Americas, also coming from a geography that is the Caribbean's, a geography that is continually exploited, continually from the natural resources to the epistemological. So just to open the conversation.
Sure. There was something you said about extraction and ideas, because, we live in a moment now where, growing up in the Caribbean, you grew up reading certain things. And, like I found it kind of interesting over the last couple of years, encountering the art world where certain institutions are kind of selling, say, someone like Glissant back to us, So it's kind of interesting to be in this geography where instead of me sort of in this in and out relationship, I'm sort of moving, across, because Sharjah is another sort of location. And so it's really interesting to sort of be negotiating across rather than in the traditional sort of, out and back in, where it's processed and then given back to you. So perhaps having this conversation here is a kind of an after. It's on now, but it's also a kind of an after that one anticipates. I don't know if that opens another question, but I feel like I'm already in an after, but not an after that's an after like like in a kind of sort of after the event, but it's like to move across is to sort of, I don't know, just to continue in something that, you know, so that's kind of where my head is at now. I'm really adjusting to this sense of across rather than, you know, north and south. Yeah.
One of the reasons why, can you hear me? Yes. One of the reasons why Diego and I are interested in Christopher's perspective is that Christopher is at once an artist, a curator, a critic, and the co-founder of a non-profit artist-led organization in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago called Aliciard. And Christopher is also someone with whom I have engaged in debates around contemporary art practices in the Caribbean and further for over maybe 15 years by now, for just about 15 years, almost 15 years. Yes. 2004 is when we met. And what comes along with it is the responsibility to continue to look out from where we belong. The Americas is what I would refer to as our safe zone, comparatively speaking to being displaced in an increasingly unsafe and unstable world. And it is the location from which I chose to speak out to this region of the world. So look for me all around you, as you by now have gathered, as the various speakers and works that have preceded one after the other have showed, is an attempt at tracing another kind of a global history, one that would use the Americas and the Gulf, two seemingly remote coordinates, as means through which to interrogate certain structures and certain histories that are surprisingly common to both areas. There's slavery and piracy, there's also oil and labor. And as concerned the art world, with the opening of this platform over the course of the weekend, but throughout the duration of the Biennial, essaying oneself at anti-hegemonic practices of exhibition making that use the structure of visibility or invisibility and of embodiment and fleshment common to cultural practices of the Americas to break away from the bounded world of the object. And so I'm sure that Christopher already understands what the Q is in terms of some of the festival, ritual, and carnival practices that have occupied a lot of our intellectual endeavors. Christopher far more so than mine. I do not know Christopher, and it might take you to expand upon the way in which your work, can you remind me the title of your work, Christopher?
Elsewhere at the beginning.
So that, Christopher's work, well, he will repeat it himself when I give him the microphone, so that Christopher's work, as much as Look For Me All Around You, come from, as I hope you may begin to feel, a rather different place than Western art historical model or Western and museum-centric exhibitionary practices. And how can we begin to decipher the workings of these other cultural practices, not solely within the meaning-making of the works, but also within the exhibition-making practices themselves. And before leaving it to Christopher to wrap up, I would refer to a scholar and former collaborator, Krista Thompson, who in an essay called How to Curate Art as a Caribbeanist, emulating the essay by another art historian, Ellen Molesworth, art historian and curator, which was called How to Curate Art as a Feminist, dares us to think beyond simply the object of exhibition towards the object of exhibition making itself, and how we can break at the hegemony of exhibition making by embedding within it the very structures which govern the making of so many of these work. It is not sufficient to open galleries to extremely sophisticated and oftentimes radical and anti-hegemonic discourses, we need to embed, as curators and as intellectual, we need to embed these structures within the very exhibitionary or counter-museological or counter-exhibitionary even methodologies that we use. So Christopher, again, I know that as a keen observer of the contemporary art world and as a follower of the work that many of us Caribbean and American scholars who have been displaced for work purposes to intervene in other contexts, I want to hear from you how you can see some of these structures at play in first of all in the work that you do, of course, but also maybe in Look For Me all around you.
Thanks, Claire. Gosh, sorry, I'm just shaking from cold. I don't know. You know, it's. I mean, I've become very interested in a certain kind of itinerancy, because I think, I mean, we live in a moment in which the artwork is being produced across a geography. I have been really nervous, you know, because when I first started becoming interested in like working around themes about oil, it really struck me that I am moving not only in a geography, you know, across space, you know, like there's a kind of an economy that surrounds the art world where the artist is also moving. But whether the artist talks about that or not is another question. And I think that came across in the conversation that Imani talked about. And you talked about this criticality that you have to, you know, a kind of irony or criticality of making work within this complex. And whether, you know, there's a kind of a compliance, a complicity, or whether there's a little bit of a resistance of not really trying to make work that fits in comfortably. And I think one of the things that fascinates me about being invited to be in this platform is that a lot of the work is, in a sense, not rooted in a kind of stationary object. It's rooted more in an event. And even the works that are, say, set in a space are still documentations of actions and events. So the kind of event is a kind of you know, floating throughout this whole platform. And that really interests me because it's both about performance and documentation of performance. But, and that fleeting, fugitive, almost itinerant quality I find kind of really interesting because it defines something about the space that I come from, where so much of what defines us is what happens between institutional spaces. You know, so that, sorry, I'm dying. But it's kind of ironic because, I mean, I like being outdoors, you know, and, but being outdoors and freezing, that's another question, because I was also thinking about the architectural idea. I never really thought about it, you know, all these museums are big boxes. And what are their thermal implications, you know, because the experiment that we do at LSE, a lot of what we do happens outdoors. But that's a kind of acknowledgement of the tropical space, so we don't tremble out there. But still, I liked kind of that really interesting moment where the call to prayer comes on, and then we have to again shift. And I think so much of what's been happening here has been having to shift as things impact upon what we're, you know, trying to do. So it requires a certain flexibility, fluidity, certain, you know, adaptive. You know. Sorry.
We have arrived at the time at which no interruption is needed other than maybe the need to go and find shelter indoors. Yes, indeed. As I mentioned earlier, there are 2 more performances that will continue the discussion through embodied experience, more so maybe than pre-learned knowledge, if you will. And the conversation remains open, much like this platform is, much like the talk series is, far less about explaining than about offering elements to compare and contrast and make up our own minds about what we're experiencing together here and now. So thank you so much.